This is the story of the incredibly brave and mostly very young crew of HMAS Australia 2, who near the end of World War II faced equally brave and mostly young Japanese pilots. Our story starts at the Naval Training Base, HMAS Cerberus in Victoria, Australia.
HMAS Cerberus, the ship that never goes to sea. This is the Navy's name for Flinders Naval Depot in Victoria. Here, thousands of reservists called up for the wartime Navy learn to be sailors.
During World War II, over 400 recruits a month passed through the gates of Cerberus, many as young as 18. Recruits came from all over Australia and from varied backgrounds.
The signalman had to know the Morse code. A high degree of technical skill was required before a man was entitled to wear the badge of a torpedo specialist. Gunnery practice. Enemies from the sky had to be fought too in this grim new naval warfare.
Cerberus was established along with the creation of the Royal Australian Navy in 1911 to prepare young Australians for the horrors of naval warfare. For the second time in its short history, Australia was preparing its young men for a Second World War. Skills were honed to aid their survival.
But now the training faced the harsh test of war. Australian warships were at action stations.
Australia was manned by many that were trained at Cerberus and were about to face an enemy with a new weapon that was brought about by desperation. Our young men were to face off with the equally young airmen of the kamikaze squads. Australia was a 10,000-ton county-class heavy cruiser and was ordered by the Australian government as part of a development program with England. Australia was commissioned at Clydebank, Glasgow on April the 24th, 1928. She served the Royal Australian Navy until she went into reserve during 1938. However, at the outbreak of World War II, Australia began in earnest to build new ships and refurbish and modernise older ships like Australia.
Cockatoo Island Dockyard worked all out to build new warships and modernise old ones. The heavy cruiser, Australia, the RAN's most powerful unit, was refitted. When war broke out, the RAN was ready with an effective fighting force of 2 8-inch gun and 4 6-inch gun cruisers, 5 destroyers and 2 sloops.
With the refit complete, her crew of about 1,000 come aboard to familiarise themselves with the ship through sea trials. Some of the crew may have even been recruits from Cerberus. Now it is time to get her and her crew to operate like a well-oiled machine. Australia was fitted with 6 8-inch guns mounted in 3 twin turrets. The crew now dials in these guns perfectly before the ship and crew come under fire for real. Australia also had 8 4-inch guns in twin mounts, as well as 8 sets of Bofor guns for anti-aircraft use. Australia had an impressive and massive firepower. Australia had 8 torpedo tubes. Her torpedo men were trained at Cerberus. The ship's warfare capabilities are honed during her sea trials. The ship's life and that of the crew depended on reliability and efficiency. The shakedown of Australia also included the proficiency of the launching of its spotter plane. With the advent of radar and other electronic measures, the spotter plane became obsolete. Before Australia's final battle, that saw her young crew face off with Japan's young airmen of the kamikaze, the plane had been removed.
Kamikaze pilots believe that by dying for the Emperor, they live forever, and some even attend their own funerals before the final takeoff. Some fly in their burial robes.
The tradition of death instead of defeat, capture, and shame was deeply entrenched in Japanese military culture, which was the primary values of samurai life of loyalty and honor until death.
Pilots take their final vow. I am determined to destroy with my own body the enemy craft that menace our holy soil. I shall strike without returning.
Kamikaze attacks began in October 1944. Japan had lost several important battles and its best pilots. Its aircraft were dated and its industrial capacity was diminished. These factors, along with Japan's unwillingness to surrender, led to the use of kamikaze tactics.
At airfields on Kyushu, southernmost island of Japan proper, more and more hastily trained pilots were inducted into kamikaze service.
About 3,800 kamikaze pilots died during the war, and more than 7,000 naval personnel were killed by kamikaze attacks. The Japanese considered the goal of damaging or sinking large numbers of Allied ships to be a just reason for suicide attacks.
But one method, and only one, can stop the kamikaze. Shoot him down before he has a chance to crash himself against a ship. American pilots pit courage and skill against the self-destroying frenzy of the Japanese.
The Allies had much superior aircraft, but this was not a turkey shoot. The kamikaze had the greater number of craft, and many got through.
The kamikaze pilots would trade a plane for a ship, trade suicide for glory. But the ships carry on.
Planes return to their carriers, some of them coming the hard way.
Unlike the wounded Japanese, Allied pilots had the small comfort of getting themselves or their damaged craft back to safety. Sadly, many perished just short of that goal. The damaged aircraft were simply pushed overboard to free up the flight deck.
The Navy took heavy losses as further waves of suicide planes dove into U.S. ships. Fortunately, not all the kamikaze missions were successful.
One last weapon remains against the kamikazes that break through the combat air patrols. Anti-aircraft fire, as intense, murderous, and impenetrable as the ships can possibly make it. The battle becomes a duel between gunners who want to live and pilots who want to die.
Air attack, and HMAS Australia's guns go into action, followed by the guns of American warships.
Australia was in the thick of it. About 19% of kamikaze attacks were successful. Australia was the most kamikazed vessel during the war. On January the 5th, 1945, in Lingayen Gulf, she was attacked repeatedly and was hit on the 5th, 6th, 8th and 9th of January. 44 crew were killed and 69 were wounded. This was the ship's last action in World War II. After an illustrious World War II career, she was sold for scrap on the 25th of January, 1955. HMAS Australia survived the entirety of World War II. Not so all who served on her.